DeLibra, in your experience, how committed are most staffing firms to incorporating DE&I principles into their hiring process?
In my experience, I think most staffing companies are committed to D&I and implementing practices that work within their organizations. I think the challenge is how to do it and what to do. And then the ones that aren't necessarily focused on this feel like they already have it right and that their organization moves forward without bias. But I challenge everyone, because even I, who have studied this for years now, we all have unconscious bias. There's always something to improve on. And DEI has to be, when you're setting your budget for the following year, working on your strategy, your long-term goals, it has to be a part of that. I think where we as an industry have gotten a little off is that we did a lot of training and checking things off of a list, but we haven't found a way yet to make it penetrate and just be who we are as an industry or a company versus, oh, we did this training, so we're good kind of thing. And I think that's where we're stuck.
So how do we effectively address that unconscious bias in the hiring process?
There's many things that can be done in the hiring process. I've spent time working with talent acquisition people and managers that make hiring decisions, as well as recruiters. So at heart, I'm a recruiter. Right. I still run a desk, and I have to be mindful of this myself in the way that I recruit. But things like being cautious about your postings, and are there certain words in the postings that would eliminate them from even applying to your positions? When you're submitting candidates or you're considering someone to bring into your organization, do you just go with the person that pops into your head right away? Do you make sure that you have a diverse bench of candidates to interview and choose from? Do you consider things like removing information that's really not pertinent for hiring managers to review? So for instance, I'm a fan of a skill sheet. So a skill sheet is something like this many years of experience, this degree, if that's necessary. What it omits is a name, because there's a lot of bias around names that don't sound what we would consider like American, or there's a lot of bias even around African American names. So if you could omit names, that helps with that, and gender. I actually think that it's important to even not consider the college that they graduated from, because I'm in Texas.
Interesting.
And in Texas, I would always say like Aggies, our A&M University here in Texas, they are extremely great at networking. Like I pushed my son to go there. I was like, you should go there because you'll have a job. But what ends up happening is, like, sometimes if you are an Aggie and you see an Aggie resume, that person climbs to the top of the pile. And so just finding a way to give everybody an opportunity like that is fair across the board, that you can't take your personal bias and apply it to the application, to at least get the person in the room for an interview.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I know been a few years now, but even thinking about going back to school myself, you go to a college because you want to have that name on your resume, right? So it's interesting to think that now from the hiring standpoint, and as we're presenting candidates, we do want to consider omitting that to make sure that it's a level playing field. So it's almost challenging whether or not higher education and the name that is on your sheet of, your one sheet matters. Real interesting thought there. I want to talk about job descriptions. So in prepping for today's conversation, I was doing some research myself, and one data point that I came across myself is the male demographic will typically apply to a job if they meet 60% of the requirements. The research that I saw shows that women typically want 100% of a 100% match before they will consider applying. I mean, there is a huge challenge there in getting top candidates to apply just because of our job descriptions, right?
Yes. So women, we do this. We analyze, we pick it apart, and we say, oh, well, they really want someone that has this attribute and I'm missing this. So they probably won't pick me. So I shouldn't even apply. And then men will say 67% of the time, I got most of this, so I'll figure out the rest, when I get in the door.
Yeah.
And I coach and challenge women all the time to do the same. I'm like, you're capable. You'll get in the door. You'll figure out the piece that you don't really know, but don't self-omit yourself. Now, on the opposite side of that, I also advise staffing companies to look at your job descriptions. One of the main things that is difficult for us to discern is when you say this is required and this is a nice to have or would be preferred. So I don't list anything that's preferred on a job description. I save those preferred characteristics and come up with questions to flush those out in the interview process. That way, candidates will still apply and not self-omit. But if a woman sees the word prefer, it doesn't even matter. We don't see that. We just say they want this person to have this.
Yeah.
And so if it's not necessarily a deal breaker, don't put it on there. That is probably the biggest advice I would give for job descriptions is like make it exactly baseline what you need. Don't use it to eliminate people if you're really trying to build a good candidate pool. And then another thing would be being cautious about, do you really need degrees for some of the positions that we're hiring for? Will work experience, do you take a certain amount of work experience into consideration? If so, then don't say that a degree is required. Also, using certain words tend to lean more masculine. And subconsciously, women will not apply because they read certain words and it feels like it's a position for a man. And some of those words are the rock star, stud, champion, salesperson that we're looking for. And a woman may very well be all of those things, but those words tend to sound like, oh, they're looking for a man. So just being cautious of like trying to make sure your verbiage is gender neutral, removing things that aren't required, and really pushing, especially with our clients, on those kinds of things like what's required and what's just what a nice to have.
I think ninja is another word that typically slants towards males. I saw that as well when I was researching for the conversation. That's
a good one. Ninja. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which no one needs a marketing ninja anyways. So that's just one that we can throw out the window completely.
I mean, that one kind of has even racial undertones. Like that one's not that great at all, but.
Right. Yeah. No, I saw that and I was like, well, no one should be listing that anyways in the first place. What's interesting there is as we look to, I like the thought of having the essentials, right? So these are the requirements for the role. This is really what you need to have, right? And then there's the nice to haves. What I'm hearing in a lot of the conversations that I'm a part of is clients are trying to pre-qualify their candidates through the job description, and they're adding more qualifications. And one of the biggest challenges right now is we're getting a volume of applies, but we're not getting quality applies. Have you seen in your experience that making sure that we have all these principles outlined and even maybe eliminating some of those requirements, can we still drive quality applications in doing so?
I think so. I mean, many times, as far as like in the staffing industry, when we're talking to our clients, we have to open them up. We have to open their parameters. Let's say they've been trying this job to hire someone for this position and they haven't been able to fill it. They're reaching out to us. One of the first things we have to do is talk to them about how tight their parameters are. And is there a case here where we may have to, what are your most important things? And if I show you a candidate that is 70% of this, will you consider them. So for one thing, we should be working to open parameters up. Second, as a recruiter, I always say that we have to spend some discretionary time and effort recruiting for marginalized candidates when we don't need them. So, for instance, like you look on groups on LinkedIn, there's thousands of groups about marketing professionals, right? So if you want to make sure you have in your arsenal a book of candidates that you can reach out to when the perfect job crosses your desk, well, you should be a part of the Black marketing professionals, the Asian marketing professionals, the women, and that way you're talking to candidates and you're getting to know people and recruiting from those groups. Things like that are things that you don't do when the job hits your desk. Because like I said, I'm a recruiter, so I know this definitely happens. Yeah. You get this hot job and you're like, it's going to get filled fast and they're calling other agencies. So we got to move quick. So whoever you already have top of mind or whoever you quickly have is going to get submitted first. That's just human nature because we're also racing against the clock to try to make the placements. So the more work you can set aside and do on your own to help you build up a database or a bench that is diverse, the better.
Yeah, I think building a bench is critical, right? And what I'm hearing is we need to make sure we're joining all groups, right? And I think instinctively, recruiters, staffing specialists, whatever it might be, you're going to join a group that you feel that you belong to as well, right? But if you're recruiting and we are eliminating that unconscious bias, it's joining all groups, right? We just want a great marketer. I don't care where they come from, who they are. I just want somebody who's perfect for the role. So DeLibra, one really good tip there that I'm hearing from you is make sure you're joining all groups. Make sure you're giving everybody a fair chance.
And we have to take care of ourselves too. So it is nice to have groups where we fit, where we can be comfortable, but it's also great to just branch out and see what else is out there. Like the group that I started, the community that I started, Women of Color in Staffing, is open to everyone. It's open to allies. We want to, we're building out a job board component so that people that that sponsor us have access to post their jobs on there. And that is a very diverse group of women by age, by sexual orientation, by race. It's going to be very diverse. And we even have a community for allies. So just trying to find ways to give those groups of people exposure to jobs that they normally wouldn't see.
Let's take a pause there. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about Women of Color in Staffing. If someone listening right now wants to join that group, join that community, where can they learn more about it?
We're on LinkedIn, Women of Color in Staffing. That's a great place to start. Follow us there. And we have monthly virtual meetups. We're meeting up in person in Nashville for Staffing World. So yeah, anyone can join us. If you're an ally and you want to help out, or if you're a woman of color and you want to be a part of an organization that is like you, feel free to join, but all are welcome.
And that's Women of Color in Staffing. Look it up on LinkedIn, or you could also connect with DeLibra Wesley on LinkedIn, and she can give you the link to that group and that community specifically. I want to talk about the role that technology might play in either enhancing or hindering diversity in recruiting. From your experience, is technology helping, or is it making it harder for DEI efforts?
I'm going to say, in my opinion, the jury is still out, because I know there's a lot of software that has been developed. I've been asked to test some. I have not necessarily been overly enthusiastic about what I've seen. And then AI has taken on all of our biases. So when people plug things like job descriptions into AI now, it spits out biased information. So I think we have a lot of work to do, especially from an AI perspective. But the technology that is coming out that can help us better match, that can help us remove things like feeding your job descriptions to it and it removes the bias terminology. I think those are going to be important and they're worth considering, definitely. My only caution is around the AI perspective because, it learns from what we feed it, and we've fed it a lot of
yeah, it's scary, right? It's
yeah.
it's information in, information out, right? And I know there was a study that came out a little while ago, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but ChatGPT and DALL-E specifically, when prompted with imagery, was only showing white males for a while in the imagery. And whether that's unconscious bias or the software was coded like that, who knows, right? I didn't make it. But when we think about correcting that and almost overcorrecting that, that's where you get into a situation, DeLibra, like you're talking about, is the AI helping us, or does it have these built-in unconscious biases that are just sort of compounding on themselves as people are searching for things and asking for images? That is something that we need to be incredibly specific with. I actually want to talk about the unconscious bias in the imagery portion. So when we look across social media, we look across companies posting, hey, now hiring, and we have images of people and we have images of different individuals in skill sets. How specific and deliberate do we need to be when choosing those images in your mind?
I will tell you, nothing matters more than representation when it comes to that. And candidates now are pretty savvy, right? They will search your website, search your social media. When they interview with you, they're paying attention to who's interviewing them. They want to see, can they see themselves in your organization? Am I going to be the only one? That's just a yucky feeling. People hate to feel as if there's not going to be a community for them. And it's just the way things are now. That is something that is considered when people are job hunting. So I think that, we all do it. I go to a lot of conferences. I look at panels. And if the panel is like all white men, like no women, no one of color, I always kind of take a pause and go, not that I don't listen to what they have to say, because the content, I'm sure, is great and I'm still going to learn something from it. But I do notice. So if I'm making a decision about where my next career opportunity is going to be, I'm going to take notice of it. And not to say that if you are at the beginning of your journey and you don't have a very diverse organization, doesn't rule you out, but you should have really good talking points on what you're going to do to fix that. So when you're talking to candidates, letting them know that we are aware, we're working on these things to make this better. And that's part of the reason why we're meeting with you today, or something like that.
Yeah. I've noticed the conference challenge as well. I get the opportunity to speak at quite a few conferences across the country throughout the year. And I've noticed that typically it is, a white male demo that is on stage. And as a result, I've made it a personal mission of take the stage to make sure that we alternate between male and female consultants in the industry. There are some incredible thought leaders in the space, and I want to make sure that everybody's represented here. But I've noticed it too. And it is interesting to me because there are incredible thought leaders in staffing and recruiting. And, I don't want to speak for any sort of conference organizer or anybody who puts those on, but we do need to make sure that everyone is represented. And I completely agree with that. DeLibra, I want to get your thoughts on somebody who's listening right now saying, listen, this all sounds great, but I'm a small staffing firm. Maybe there's a 3 to 5 person team. I hear you. I don't think I have unconscious bias, but I hear you. Where in the world do I even get started? What do you say to that person?
So I always say, until aliens completely take over, or robots or something, we all have unconscious bias. If we're human, it just is. So we have been socialized, we've been raised, we all have something. I always share. I do a unconscious bias training pretty frequently with different staffing companies. And I always share my own personal bias, which, believe it or not, I've been a single mom up until recently. And so it's very strange, just the way my life has gone, that I actually have a slight gender bias. So, and I learned this by taking the implicit bias testing on Harvard's website, and it's free of charge. You can go through and there are tons of tests. And so I was just taking all the tests and I was rocking along and like, wow, I'm coming out pretty good here. No bias. And then I came across the gender, and it's in gender roles that my bias surfaced. And so I always say we all have them, even I, and I've worked on it for so long now, but it's still, it's just a part of who I am. So I have to just pause and give myself time to think things through and then act whenever that surfaces. But a small organization is great. I started National Recruiting Consultants in 2021. It's been so much easier to do things right while we're little than whenever I was the COO of a large staffing company and I wanted to implement changes, when then you've got like a huge board and you got an exec team and you got to convince everybody that this is what we should be doing. And it's like pulling teeth to do small, simple things. Like, so as a smaller organization, it's easier, in my opinion, to study, figure out the things that you want to do and implement changes. A couple of things that I did right away when I started NRC is created a gender neutral dress code.
Okay.
I built out a parental leave plan that works for the birthing parent or bonding parent.
Okay.
And it's very rich. Because I do believe that a big part of our issue is the gap in pay for women and men. And so I started out with that and said, okay, women lose so much income over their lifespan because they have children. And I tend to believe that I was so thoughtful about this because I am a woman and I had a baby while I was in staffing and it was difficult. And it shouldn't be that difficult to do what only we can do. No one else can have them, but it almost feels like you get punished for creating, which we need to do.
Right.
So figuring out a parental leave plan for whether it's a same-sex couple or just something universal that works for everyone. Creating pay transparency. That is a big deal within our industry. There's a lot of closed door conversations that happen. I mean, I've been a part of them historically, and I just have learned so much now that this is where things go awry. Everyone in my organization has the same salary. Everyone knows each other's salary. Your difference in compensation comes in from your commissions and how much work and effort you put into it. And I know many organizations say, well, we're a meritocracy. I don't buy it if everybody doesn't know exactly where everybody stands. So I don't close the door and say, hey, I know you have a family to support and this and the other. I'm going to give you a bridge, or I'm going to give you a year of a higher salary. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
When that happens, that's a leader being biased and making a decision to give something extra to that one individual. I've walked away from great talent. This week because I refused to budge on that.
Yeah.
And so, and if you have to do that, it should be so, I'm really passionate about this. So it should be so calculated and methodical. And I'm going to pay, this organization pays this much more for this much more for this. So everyone can see how the pay it works out. So if you decide, no, I'm going to pay people more who have more experience, great. But everyone should understand it and know how it works and how they can raise their pay. And then I think that those are the big things for me. The pay transparency, parental leave, simple things like dress codes. And then another thing is like, it is such an easy thing to give out cultural days of awareness, and it doesn't really cost like these things. Well, the parental leave could cost you, but like telling people, go celebrate what culturally is important to you. Tell us what day that is. Here's a few extra vacation days, PTO days for you to celebrate holidays that mean something to your family. And I think that's an easy one that any of us can do. And employees appreciate it.
It's a fantastic set of parameters and almost the blueprint if you're thinking about getting started in this, and really wanted to bring the question of, listen, I know there's people listening right now who say, I hear you and I want to be doing this. I know we should have been doing this for a while. I just don't know where to get started. I love you bringing a couple tips there of this can change rapidly. Here's where we can get started. What about in the screening process? So we're reviewing applications this afternoon. We're submitting applications this afternoon. We're submitting candidates to our clients this afternoon. What are maybe one or two things that people can do right now to eliminate some of that unconscious bias?
Go ahead and submit one or two people that normally you would pass on, because there's just one thing about them. And the other thing is I know exactly who my opposite is in the way that we think, our personality. We've had all these assessments done. So I will go bounce things off of that person. Would you submit this candidate? What do you think? What do you see? And that is the best person to interview opposite of me too, when we're interviewing internally for our organization. So finding someone who thinks differently from you and having them help screen helps you to see things differently. And maybe even though you know one or two people, just go ahead and I normally wouldn't, but I'm going to push this through. And sometimes you're surprised at who gets chosen.
Yeah. Love that idea. As we look ahead to the next 5 or 10 years, what do you think the biggest challenge in DE&I is for the staffing and recruiting industry?
I think we're already sitting in such a big challenge. We see legislation changing and funding being taken away. And within our industry, we created a lot of DEI positions, and now we're starting to remove them. And I think the big challenge was we created positions and we didn't give necessarily the funding or the decision-making ability to the people that we gave those roles to. And they were disenchanted and there was a lot of turnover. And I think that DEI has to live in the C-suite. And that is a challenge. Because oftentimes C-suite executives will say, I have someone, HR handles that, and they don't see the importance of making it a priority. So that by far is the biggest challenge. And I think when CEOs make it a big deal and this is who we are, this is what we stand for, then the rest of everyone else respects it so much more. And they all understand that's who I am. When people apply here with NRC, it's everywhere. And so if you're not comfortable with that, then you probably don't want to work at this organization, and that's okay too. But I think that's what we need, and that is our challenge.
Yeah, I think that top-down cultural, I don't want to say cultural fit, but making sure that everything comes top-down, I think makes a ton of sense, right? And I also think it's bottom-up too, right? The whole organization needs to understand what it is that you're looking to achieve and sort of the culture that you've developed within that organization. And then that is then passed on to your clients. It's passed on to your prospects through the candidates that you're submitting to them. So I would completely agree with you there. Before we get to our rapid fire round, anything else on the form of DEI that has been on your mind lately that maybe we didn't get to?
The biggest thing for me as of late has been the one thing that I kind of harped on already is paid transparency. I think that is going to be, unless we get extremely intentional and we start moving quickly to make pay gap changes, it's only furthering the divide. The article I read, it might have been a McKinsey report that said it was 136 years before our pay could catch up to men. And I just worry that we may do this study again in 5 or 6 years and it's 150 because we are doing some things politically and within business to further the divide and not make this an important factor. And I have gotten to where I'm not going to wait for our wonderful government to figure out how to compensate women when they have babies. I think that it's the private sector. We have to do it.
Would you recommend having a fixed rate on a job listing instead of that range? Do you find that range is sort of the unconscious bias coming through?
I don't know. That is an excellent question. I don't know where I stand on that because I get the reason for a range if you're really hiring and willing to pay more for experience. But if the pay is what the pay is, like it's easy for me in the production side of our business. The pay is what the pay is.
Right.
And so I get it if it's a position where we will hire you and train you for this amount. But if you come in and you have your certifications and you can hit the ball rolling or, I don't know, I'm thinking maybe IT or something, then it makes sense that you may get paid on the higher end. So I think the range is okay. And I think the range is at least a place to start because that's even new. Like we haven't been doing that until recently, but I think it has to be audited. We ought to be looking at it to make sure what we're saying is what we're doing. If we're saying we pay people at a certain level, this amount, we should be double checking that that's what we're doing.
Right. And holding ourselves accountable to that and making sure we hold our teammates accountable to that and ultimately holding our clients accountable to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
DeLibra, before I let you go, I got to run you through the rapid fire round if you got a couple minutes here.
Let's do it.
All right. One book that has fundamentally changed your life.
I would say that book would be Grit by Angela Duckworth. And I read it annually. I do a book review with my team. Yeah. I feel like hard work and resilience is the big equalizer. So even if you are not the most talented, but you are gritty, you can get there. So I love the book Grit.
I was looking behind me. We have that on the bookshelf in the hallway through this door. It's not on this one, but I am also a fan of that book as well. My wife loves that book. I'm a big fan of the book too, but Rachel actually brought it to me. She was reading it I don't know if she was reading it at work with another colleague or somehow it got to her. And then she brought it to me, which I loved it too. One conversation with anybody, living or dead, who's it going to be?
So I have three people, but I'm going to just tell you one. Harriet Tubman.
Okay. Good answer. We haven't gotten Harriet Tubman on the podcast yet.
I think about the amount of leadership skills that she just innately must have had to bring thousands of people through such dangerous situations to freedom. And she led troops even to go and fight. I mean, It's just insane. Like the fact that she was able to do what she was able to do at night with babies, with, I don't know, like the leadership skills she must have possessed are just unheard of. I would love to talk to her.
Fantastic answer. We haven't had her. No one has said her on the podcast yet. Great answer. One piece of advice for someone just starting in the staffing and recruiting industry.
Don't waste time. Close your day like every day is the last day. Make sure you give it all that you have to work so hard when you first start out. And I think it's easy for us to see people who've been in the industry and have built up their business and see that they don't necessarily have to work as hard as coming to them. Mm-hmm. But what we don't see is we tend to look at the top producers and say, I want to be like them. We don't see what it was like when they had to start. So just know that starting out in this industry, it's worthwhile. It's a great way to make a amazing living for your family, but you have to trust and believe in yourself. Don't start to doubt it and work way harder than you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, I love that thought. I mean, everyone sees the outcome. They don't see the input that got you there, right? And the overnight success is usually 10 to 15 years of hard work to become the overnight success. But no one sees that work,
no
right?
one sees that part.
In the music world, they see that one hit single that all of a sudden, oh, they were an overnight star, an overnight success. They don't see the 15, 20 years that it took to get to that point, right? And
yeah,
I think,
you know that there's another book called Outliers. By Malcolm Gladwell. That one. So yes.
That one is on the shelf.
Yeah. He talks about that very thing. Like about when the Beatles came on the scene, like they were this fresh new group, but they'd been practicing together for years in this hole in a wall, like night after night. Like there is no like overnight success. There's always like some hard work behind it. We just don't see it.
Yep. One of my favorite books. That was actually one that I powered through in a train ride in New York City. I got it done on the way there.
Wow.
And typically a book takes me a little bit. I don't know. I just get sleepy when I read. I love to read. And that's why I asked the question, one book that has fundamentally changed your life. Friends of the show, I'll be honest, I'm building my own book library. Those questions are for me, not for you. but certainly that was one of my favorite books, and I'm actually probably due to read it again.
Interesting. DeLibra, we have the same taste in books, it seems.
We do. There are a lot over here that I like to read. And like I said, friends, as much as it is to give you one book that could fundamentally change your life from our guests, I got to be honest, I'm just building my own book library over here. DeLibra, I want to thank you for coming on Take the Stage and sharing all your wonderful insights with us. Friends, she's DeLibra Wesley, the National Recruiting Consultants founder and the founder of Women of Color in Staffing. If you want to learn more about Women of Color in Staffing, you can look for that community on LinkedIn. DeLibra will also put your contact information in the show notes if anybody wants to get a hold of you. And one more time before I let you go, I know you said you were holding a meetup at Staffing World this year. I want to give you just one more opportunity to talk about that and give you the stage and the floor to possibly drive some more visitors to that event.
Absolutely. We don't have it all ironed out yet, so please reach out to me on LinkedIn. But our goal is we are monthly we meet monthly. We have different speakers, different discussions. We just had a very good discussion about microaggressions as a group. And our first in-person meetup will be in Nashville. So if you're attending Staffing World, please look me up on LinkedIn or Women of Color in Staffing, and we'll get you involved in the group. And we also are looking for sponsors to help us keep this great community going. And it is a nonprofit, so it's a great, tax write-off, all of. So anything that any ideas or any things and thoughts that we have coming up for Women of Color in Staffing, we also post on LinkedIn so you can kind of stay abreast of what's coming up next for the community. So thank you.
DeLibra, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.